Many doubted we'd ever see it, but here it is. The return to glory.
McDavid stops up. What a move. Shoots. Scores!
What a year it's been in sports, 2019. And welcome to The Outsiders. Bryn Griffiths along with Robin Brownlee. How you doing today?
I'm excellent, Bryn. How about you, man?
Fine, thanks. Well, we've been doing this for about 6 months. We haven't been around for all of this. We were not around when Tiger won at the Masters, much to everybody's surprise. Bianca winning at the U.S. Open. There's been a lot of big, huge events that have kind of surprised a lot of people. But on our big podcast, we've been trying to track down people that we know, but maybe don't fully know. And it's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed this over the past 6 months. Have you?
Oh, absolutely. And the great thing is, to this point, nobody's kicked the front door down and told us to stop.
No, you're right. Just keep rolling. And the positive feedback we're getting from everybody is huge. And everybody's been very encouraging. The next step for us in the new year is to continue to book great guests that you want to hear. And also, now it's time to start asking some folks if they wouldn't mind supporting us in some manner to help us stay on the air. And so we'll start looking for some potential clients.
Has anybody written you, Bryn, and just said, you guys suck?
No.
Have we had that yet?
No, and I will tell you, it's the one refreshing thing about doing a podcast as opposed to just being on the air over the radio waves. And that is the fact that over the radio waves, anybody just turn the radio on, they can listen to you, and they either love you or hate you. Well, the hate people are not going to bother wasting their time downloading a podcast to listen to one guy or two guys that they don't like. They're just not going to do it.
Not one negative email from my family.
I haven't had a single negative email from anybody.
Excellent.
It's been fantastic. So a big thank you to everybody for that. We'll tell you how you can reach us at the end of today's Best Of show. It's hard to believe we're doing a Best Of show. I know we've only been on for 6 months, but we've had some fun guests. It's been really, really enjoyable.
Well, the nice thing is, Bryn, and not to toot our own horn too loud, there's been more than once when we've looked across this desk at each other when one of our guests has been in the middle of an answer and we've both just nodded like, hey, this is gold. And with a show like this, we've tried to clip some of that stuff and put it together because we've had a terrific lineup for the most part, and some real enlightening stuff's come out of them too.
Well, this is the Best of the Outsiders holiday show. We're with you for the next 2 weeks, right through until the 5th of January. It's the holiday show, as I said, sampling of some of the more thought-provoking and fun interviews we've done since we kicked things off over the summer months. Our very first guest was not a hard guest to convince to come on with us because we have both known him for such a long time. And I was thinking about this last night, that after Bob Cole decided it was time to step away from the microphone, he's become the elder statesman of play-by-play voices in Canada. But his mark on Canadian sports goes back a long way. And if you start looking back at your soundtrack of your sporting life, I'll guarantee you Chris Cuthbert is probably on half of those memorable moments that you followed when you were, a real big sports fan and still are to this very day. Is that not fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. And a hell of a guy.
Yeah, exactly. So, we had Chris on and it was fun. We talked to him for about 35 minutes. And I guess the first thing we had to ask him, well, it was a question that I was kind of curious about. And that is the fact that, okay, if you do all these memorable moments, do you have a favorite or do you have a 1A or a 1B? How do you look at it? When I look at some of those magical moments that you've done, obviously the golden goal is right there. But I often have wanted to ask you, what would be the number 2 moment for you? Is that number 1 first and foremost?
Oh, it is number 1, and I'd have trouble with the number 2, to be honest with you. I have fond memories of a number of Grey Cup games. Maybe the first one, which I'm not going to be very popular in Edmonton because it was the 96 Grey Cup, which was, for a lot of reasons, it was a spectacular game. The wintry conditions, it was high scoring, but it was my first Grey Cup, and I was wired, and I remembered getting to the stadium I'm about an hour away from where the game was, and when I left my home, it was overcast and kind of a dull day, but that was it. By the time I got to the stadium, we were in a full blizzard, and I was really let down because I thought the conditions were going to ruin the game, ruin my Grey Cup debut, but it was anything but, from Eddie Brown's amazing catch to a couple of big touchdown returns and even some controversy. Doug Flutie, I think, mentioned years later that a fumble that was ruled dead by a whistle should have been called a fumble and a recovery by the Eskimos. And anyway, it was just a spectacular game, and that's one of them. But I'd say there's about a half dozen Grey Cups that are in that category. And I don't rate individual hockey games as much as I do series. And there's been some amazing series that I've got to call over the years, and those are the ones from the 91 Oiler Flames series that went overtime in Game 7 to the 94 Devils Rangers, that the Rangers won in overtime in Game 7 and went on to win their first Stanley Cup in a million years. There's a lot of those that stand out, and a 5 overtime game between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, that's the longest TV game ever, back a few years ago, that Keith Primo won. And anyway, lots of those, and I could keep going because again, I really would have trouble saying what my second favorite call is.
There you go, Chris Cuthbert. Okay, Ron Lowe joined us this past couple of months. We had to get him on because we wanted to talk about a guy that both you and I know who passed away, and that was Ted Green. The nickname Terrible Teddy Green, and both of us probably laughed when we read that because we knew that the one thing Teddy Green wasn't to us was terrible.
That's the last thing Teddy Green was. You spent a lot of time with these guys around the rink, Bryn. So did I. Ronnie Lowe is a guy I got along with right from day one. Nobody's going to suggest he was the best coach that the Edmonton Oilers have ever had. But I'll tell you this, he was the most fun guy to work with and around. Got along with him instantly. And you know the other thing too, he's a good man. And he continues to do a lot of great stuff in Edmonton today. And when you talk about Teddy Green, which we asked him about, Teddy was very much the same. Terrible Ted Green. It makes people who know him laugh. Ted Green had a heart of gold. He was a wonderful man who gave much back to this community. And there were a lot of people truly sad and some devastated when he passed away. I remember he called me over once and he didn't like something I'd written. And he didn't swear, he didn't yell, he didn't threaten, but he put one of those big meat hooks of his on my shoulder, and he said, "Robin, I don't think what you wrote the other day was right." And we had a discussion. At the end of it, he just smiled, and all he said was, "Just be fair." He was so understated, so soft-spoken, and there was such a big heart under that exterior, you sometimes couldn't get to it unless you knew him.
No, and that is the truth. I mean, when he talked in a dressing room, and Teddy didn't really do a whole lot. He didn't do a bunch of yelling, I'll tell you that. In fact, I don't know if I've ever heard him raise his voice in the dressing room, but all he had to do was look at you. And if he was talking in a pregame speech or after a period, he would be giving his little chat before you go back out on the ice. And if he was looking at you, you knew where the comments were being directed. And believe me, like you said, if you wanted to stare down, it's one you wouldn't win if you were watching Teddy.
Do you have a favorite story? Is there one that sticks out in your mind? Because there's so many.
Well, I think one of the all-time great stories about Teddy, and it happened in Washington, D.C. one night. We were playing the Caps, and Teddy was head coach, and we were having a bit of a bitch of a time at that time, and I remember Sean Van Allen got just smoked. I think it was by Craig Ludwig. Just drilled him, knocked him out cold. I mean, and we're talking out cold. And well, he kind of stumbles off on his own 2 feet, so we know he's not deathly, but we know he's hurt. So the doc comes in and says, "Geez, Teddy," he says, "we got kind of bad news here." He says the kid's totally out of it, can't remember the hit, and doesn't know who he is or where he's at. And Teddy says, "Well, when he wakes up, can you tell him he's Wayne Gretzky and we're in Washington and we need him?"
Yeah, that's classic, Teddy. Yeah,
and in the meantime, he's still feeling really bad for Sean, because the minute Sean comes back in the room, I mean, he's really worried about him. But his wit at that point in time just caught me totally off guard, and the doc didn't know what to say. It was crazy. But that's Teddy.
Good friend of ours is Gene Principe, does the hosting of the Edmonton Oilers broadcast on Sportsnet. And we've also known Gene for a very, very long time. I don't think there are too many people nicer in the media business than Gino.
I will steal from old hockey man Tommy McVie. If you can't get along with Gene Principe 100 times out of 100, you're the asshole.
Yes. And you're going to get along with Gene no matter who you are. Gene, I've seen Gene stopped in public, and he always gives people the time of day. And I you know what? It's been a tough month here for Gino because he lost his mother recently. And when you take a look at your upbringing with your dad and your mom, and you see the reflection, I know Gene's mom would sit in the seats at Rogers Place. And, of course, people find out that you're Gene Principe's mom and would always have time for it. But you know what? Gene's mom always had time for other people, just like Gene. And so as much as the Principe family are going to miss Gene's mom, you can see that he is a chip off the old block. But you know what? And one of the things he pointed out to us is that it is not exactly easy being the local kid, especially in the fervent community, the Italian community in Edmonton, where everybody thinks that just because you're the guy who's hosting those other broadcasts, you got an in.
Well, I'm not as inside. Sometimes I got uncles who, not so much now, but when Kevin Lowe was the GM, I've got uncles, telling me, you should tell him to do this, you should tell him to do that. And I'm like, I don't sit beside him and have an office beside him. And even when, of course, being Italian, when Peter Chiarelli was the GM, they figured I could just, kind of over some, prosciutto and a cappuccino, we could talk over trade ideas, but it didn't quite work like that.
Peter, have a sandwich. We need to have a conversation.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny though, like, honestly, when he got hired, right away, first of all, my parents were like, it's not, un si chiama Chiarelli, it's Chiarelli. Chiarelli is the way they would say it back in the old country. But as you guys know, people come over, and whether you're Finnish or Swedish, the names get kind of, changed,
yes,
or North Americanized. So that was one of them. And then my mom would always say, "Ma dici de Grimaldi?" So she would say, "Ashley's from Grimaldi," which is a small town in Italy. And I'm like, "Ma, he's not." Like, Peter was very, business-like, and we didn't have a lot of opportunities to just sort of socialize. But the Italian community was, since Fernando Pisani, I think he was the the biggest Italian attraction to the Oilers. Of course, Andrew, Cogliano. So the Italian community, like any community, sort of connects with someone of their own when they end up being involved with the Oilers in any way, shape, or form.
Well, it's funny because for the longest time when I worked with Brian Hall at CJCA on the Eskimo broadcast, and Halsey was always Louis Pasaya. And
yeah, right. That's right.
And everybody used to just make fun of Brian, like, oh my God, he's bastardizing another name and everything. and so one time I had a chance to talk to Louis, and I said, hey, listen, and I didn't do this on the air because I didn't want to, embarrass Brian or anything. I said, is it Pasaglia or is it Pasaya? He said the G is silent like in lasagna. Halsey's actually correct, but it's turned into Louis Pasaglia.
Yeah, right. The G is is silent. I mean, I'm one to talk. My name, if you're in Italy, it's Principe, right?
Yeah,
So
say what?
Principe is yeah, exactly. What? It's Principe. I mean, so, but you come over here and it just sort of gets changed a little bit. But anyways, it's interesting whether it doesn't matter whether you're, like the German people of Edmonton now have, connected with Leon. It's a natural, right? When you get situations like that, I mean, it's just kind of the way it works. So you're proud of the Oilers, and you're proud of certain people who have, a common background or a culture that you have.
One of the guests that we had this past year, Darren Fleury, was one of our earlier guests and made a hell of an impact with his comments. The other thing that I've noticed is that going back through the various interviews we've done, Theo's name comes up frequently, as you're going to find out through the rest of this show today. Theo's name comes up an awful lot with some of our other guests because he's made a mark with them. But so much has been said and written about the horrible situation that Theo went through, both in junior hockey, and also you could see it was reflected in some of the off-ice antics as a professional hockey player. But Theo was a great guest.
Oh, he was. And you know what? Everybody now knows Theo's story, but it took a long, long time for it to get out. And the thing with Theo is, as most people now know, is he has turned around what was a life-altering situation, but that can break you. And sadly, it's broken a lot of people. Not with Theo. He's gone on to become a real advocate for people struggling with mental health issues, sexual abuse, drug or alcohol addiction. And Theo has taken, he's climbed out of the ruins of what was a terrible period in his life to become a real advocate for people. And he's straight ahead now, and he's every bit as determined in that advocacy as he was on the ice.
And he found the strength to write the book. That was a huge thing for him. But he told us one story. He said it was an aha moment for him when he realized, this is what I got to do.
Well, I would say the first book signing actually changed my life and changed my direction in how I viewed my own personal situation. So when I sat down to write the book, the only thing I was going to talk about was my hockey career. And the lady that I wrote the book with, she made me feel, relatively safe right from the very beginning of writing the book. And so 3 years later, we finished the book and I tell the whole entire story. 4 days before I'm going to Toronto to launch this book, like I'm shitting in my pants and I'm so afraid and so scared because I don't know how, the public's going to react to what's in the book. And I also knew that I was going to be going to do a whole bunch of media surrounding the book. And I knew that the only thing that the media would be interested in would be to re-victimize me at every opportunity, right? Because I'm a pretty smart and bright guy. I spent 4 days on my computer researching absolutely every single thing I could find on the subject of child sexual abuse, because I wanted to get a story of hope and healing and recovery, out to the masses. So sure enough, I show up in Toronto. I do 300 interviews in the first 4 days that I'm there. I'm on Big Red Couch with Strombo, TSN, Sportsnet, every major newspaper, magazine, morning radio show. I do it all. And sure enough, the only thing they're interested in is the gory details of my sexual abuse. But like a good politician, you never have to answer the reporter's questions directly. So it didn't matter what question they asked me. I made sure that I had 5 main points that I wanted to get across in every single interview that I did. And so I got this story of hope and healing and recovery out there. And then, the next thing on the docket was the first book signing. And my expectations for the book were really low. I thought I'd show up and sign 10 books and go to the next town and sign 10 books and so on and so forth. So I show up at the biggest Indigo chapter store in all of Canada, downtown Toronto. right on Yonge Street there. And I walked through the front doors of the bookstore, and there are 400 people standing in line with my book. And I'm like, geez, like, what are all these people doing here? This is very weird and strange, you know? And so I start signing books, and I spot this guy in line, and he's got my book clutched against his chest, and his face is buried in the floor, and, you know, he was visibly disheveled. He was wearing, you know, dirty sweatpants, a ripped T-shirt. His hair was fairly greasy, and I was like, you know, I wonder what's up with this guy. So I follow him all the way in the line. He gets to the front of the line, puts the book on the table, looks me in the eye, and says, "Me too."
Wow.
And that's basically, you know, was like an exclamation point as to, you know, why I put all this on paper. And then what happened after that is I got completely run over by people everywhere I went. 5, 10, 15, 20 people were coming up to at every book signing and saying, "Hey, I read your book. You told my story. Me too." Or, "Hey, I saw your documentary. You told my story. Me too." "Hey, I read an article in the newspaper. You told my story." Me too. And so basically for the last 10 and a half, 11 years, you know, that's been my life is, you know, everywhere I go, you know, people come up to me and say, "Hey, I found the courage and the strength to find my own voice by, you know, by your example." And so, you know, it's just been absolutely incredible to be that sort of conduit for people to, you know, seek me out or search me out to find me so that they can tell me their Me Too story.
It's been an interesting 6 months for Craig McTavish, former guy with the Edmonton Oilers. What didn't he do? He was played here, coached here, GM'd here, decided to go to the Continental Hockey League. That didn't last very long, but a lot of people had warned him about the situation he was going into. It was a little volatile, but he's always got that positive demeanor. Every time I've met him and talked to him, and I've known him for as long as you have, he's always pretty upbeat, is he not?
Well, absolutely. You know, Mac T's just got that coaching bug. You know, he was a terrific Oiler, obviously, won cups here with the Oilers, went to New York, got into the Cup parade there, became an assistant coach there, made his way back to Edmonton under Kevin Lowe, you know, became a longtime coach here who had some success. He was behind the bench in that 2006 Cup final appearance.
One win away from winning it all.
Yes, or one injury to Dwayne Rollison away from winning it all. But you know what? It's never looked back. It's never sour grapes. You know, along the way, he left Edmonton, and that was a terrible time for him because you know the ties that keep him here. Went away, went and coached in Chicago with the Wolves. You know, went back did some schooling. He keeps coming back kind of like a salmon to the stream. Mac T has got the coaching bug. You go to the KHL, you know, it didn't work out. He was gone almost before he got unpacked. You know, Spengler Cup.
He's there right now.
You know, he's got the energy. And the funny thing is, Mac T, I know I don't always have the most energy. Mac T is exactly 1 day older than me. We're the same age. So he just says, "Hey, I got a lot of life to live and more coaching to do." So it's no surprise that this coaching bug has still got him in its grips. It's years zip by. I remember when you were still in New York and I was talking to you about coming in to Edmonton and joining the staff here. There's a lot of water under the bridge since then. You come to Edmonton, you have that many years here, you have the Cup run, you end up leaving Edmonton, you end up coming back to Edmonton, you go to Yaroslavl, now Spengler Cup. You've got, what's this coaching bug you've got? You could walk away if you wanted to and go sit by the lake and contemplate life, but you're still in the mix.
Well, I've got a lot of living to do, Robin. And I guess I'm fortunate in respect to being in a position where I can choose to do things that I really want to do. And, I like the coaching. I really enjoyed working with the players in the KHL. It has had its challenges for sure, but overall it was a wonderful experience over there working with the players. I really enjoyed that part of it. And, it just dovetailed into going and coaching Canada at the Spengler. So it's going to be another great experience. And I'm looking forward to it, but I've always liked to stay busy, but I've not done a lot really, over the last, month and a half or 2 months. I've had, treated myself well, went on vacation. I've really enjoyed, going to the Oiler games. Got season tickets at the Oiler games, and, I didn't know how I'd react to going to the games, but I've loved it. It's a great experience, and certainly sitting down with the fans lower to the ice level gives you a much better perspective on the game. I think, when you watch the games from the press box, where you guys watch the games, or where we were watching the games from the eyebrow on the other side of the press box, you just lose so many of the important aspects of the game. And I've really enjoyed it. The Oilers have been great to watch. McDavid, obviously, and Draisaitl are just, amazing to watch. We're really lucky to be able to watch those two guys night in and night out, and they just continue to get better and more dominant. Which we're really, really fortunate to have both those guys, and a couple guys that I've seen this year that have really made a big difference. One would be Ethan Bear, for sure.
Yep.
That just the puck movement and the way he's played has really solidified the defense, and especially that pairing with Darnell. They've been really good from the games that I've seen. I haven't seen them all, but he's played. When you're in the minors, a lot of times you hear, and I believe it to be true, that playing in the NHL is sometimes, and in a lot of ways, easier than playing in the American Hockey League, because everything's more organized. The execution is at a better level, a greater level, and Ethan Bear can think the game and move the puck, and he's really in a lot of ways he's playing better here than he did last year in Bakersfield, and he was really good down there last year. So he's been good. Cassian, I like the grinders, and he really brings a lot for me. I enjoy him, but I've really enjoyed watching the Oilers this year.
This is going to be a fun interview, because it's going to be just like having a coffee with you in the coach's room, because we're going to be all over the place. Because I was going to ask you a question about the K. We'll get to that in a minute. Yeah. But I got to ask you, so you're sitting in the crowd now watching these games. How is that? How is everybody in the section you're in?
They're awesome. They're great. I think, just great Oiler fans, very supportive. The team's been easy to support. I might not have wanted to be there last year, but no, they've been great. They're really respectful to me, and I've had a great time. I know everybody around the section around me, and I go to the game with my kids and my wife, and it's great entertainment.
Stu Grimson has a big book out, obviously talking about his career as a National Hockey League pugilist. There's a good word. I never use that. There's a word you never use on a regular basis.
I love the word.
It's a great word. But if I was going to have a coffee or beer with you and we're talking about fighters, I'm not so sure I would use that word.
No.
I used it here. Anyway, Stu Grimson joined us on the show. Another one of those guys where we needed to ask a simple yet complex question. I got to ask you kind of a bit of an offbeat question. Who gave you the most trouble on the opposition? And it's a two-parter. Who created the most problems for you on your own teams?
That's a good question. I'll answer the second question first, the latter question first. You know, there are lots and lots of guys that made my job a little more challenging, just in terms of keeping me and my other teammates on our toes. Darren Fleury was a teammate in Salt Lake City for about half a year. He was terrorizing the league on the score sheet and certainly on the ice. And he was a handful while he was out there. He took no prisoners. You know, for a smaller guy, he played with a real, a real nasty edge, and he wasn't shy. And of course, for guys like myself, we had to be ever mindful that, Theo might be, inches from, or just another high sticking infraction or something from kind of setting off World War I on the ice. So we were always pretty mindful of the way the game was going when we played for Theo. And I'll tell you, in terms of your first question, and the guys that used to give me as, in terms of that enforcer type role, the guys that used to give me the greatest challenge, I'll put all the left-handers in the same category. Guys like George Laraque, guys like Dave Brown, for whatever reason, and a lot of dominant right-handed guys will tell you, lefties are a challenge to fight. And that was certainly true of guys like George and Big Dave. I'm very fond of saying I'd probably still be playing today were it not for lefties.
How long have you known Mark Spector for?
Well, I got to the Journal in December of 1989, and he looked like he was doing handstands, frankly, because upon my arrival, we were the only two young-ish single guys in the sports department. Everybody at that point was home for dinner at 6 o'clock when they were in town, and we had some fun when I first got here. And I've known him a long time, so 89, do the math. It's been a while.
And he and I got started at CJSR Radio. It's a campus station in the University of Alberta in Edmonton. And I convinced Spec that I thought he could do play-by-play for the U of A Golden Bear basketball team. I was doing the hockey play-by-play with Claire Drake. He got to work with a great coach named Don Horwood, who was able to help him through things a little bit. But Spec did a nice job. But his first love, obviously, was writing. Also wrote for the Gateway, which is the newspaper there at the U of A, and then just worked his way up. Like a lot of the newspaper people in Edmonton had worked their way through the Gateway. I think Cam Cole was one of those guys. There's a bunch of guys. Anyway, we had Spec on the show, and one of the things we were talking about, and the timing is right, because right now the World Junior Hockey Championships getting rolling in the Czech Republic, and Spec talked with us about how he got involved about writing his new book about the World Junior Hockey Championship.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. I won't even brag and say that it's my idea. I basically got a call from a publisher and said, what do you think of this idea of doing something on the sort of the history of the World Junior? We're calling it Road to Gold. And it's a story about how, in the 70s, we used to send the Memorial Cup champs over to Leningrad, and they'd get beat up by the Russians, right? They couldn't beat anybody. They'd lost their good players from last year. They didn't know how to play hockey in Europe. They didn't understand the European referees. We had no system. We had no continuity, and we were getting killed in this thing. And Canada came up with a program of excellence and, really put a focus on getting good at this. And today, all of a sudden, not suddenly, but over the many years, today, the World Junior is to Canadians at Christmas what football is to Americans at Thanksgiving, right? It's a family affair, and it's a deep, deep, deep tradition. And, we've gone from winning everything all the time, 5-6 years in a row, to being back in the fight in the World Junior, right? It's not a given that Canada wins that thing anymore.
No, absolutely. Hey, Spec, two quick ones for me. Where can people get the book if they want it? Because we're into that Christmas season now. And second question, will you be trying to move any copies at Henry's High Life in San Jose?
I love Henry's High Life. That's a barbecue joint, one of the best in the league, man. Hey, books everywhere, all chapters, and I think Walmart's, and certainly on Amazon, and anywhere you buy a book, you should be able to buy this book. But yes, thanks, Robin. That's a good call. I got an off night tonight in San Jose, and you know what? I haven't had the meat sweats for a while, so maybe that's a good place to go.
Darren Dreger's joined us twice on our show. I don't know how we're able to be so lucky to get him on our show twice, but we have.
Have we had to pay him yet?
No, but we'll figure something out when he comes to town next. That's for sure. We got to thank him big time for that. But, you know, one of the things we were talking about, and this goes back to the first time we chatted with him, and we were talking about some of the big contracts this past off season. And Darren told us, obviously, it's a big cat and mouse game. It's always been one. But we started to weigh some of the things that happened over the summer months a little bit, and he gave us his take on things and where it might lead to by the time we get to next summer.
There's got to be a little bit of eye rolling in the commissioner's office looking at some of these contracts paying out, right? Because, you know, when you invest so deeply into a few players as Toronto has specifically, you're putting all your eggs in one basket, and if it doesn't pan out, then what do you do? You know, you're stuck. And you look at the unrestricted free agents that Toronto is going to have to wrangle with at the end of this year, which includes Tyson Barrie, who, I mean, if Tyson Barrie has another 60-plus point season, he's going to command top dollar on the open market. Toronto's not going to be able to afford that. You've got Cody Ceci, who is a good, dependable NHL defenseman. You've got Jake Muzzin, 3 defensemen who are going to be unrestricted free agents next year. And you know, I'm not projecting that the salary cap is going to go to $90 million in the next 2 years. So it's going to come at someone's expense. There's no question about that.
Did you like that Morrissey number? Do you think that's really going to be setting the tone for a lot of these future deals here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say he's underrated because I think we've seen enough of Josh Morrissey to know what he is and what he's developing into. To get him on that term at 6.25, I mean, it's not a steal. You're talking about $50 million, but that's money well spent, and that's quality management by the Winnipeg Jets. And look, some players, guys, you know this, you've been around the game a long time. You know, Josh Morrissey obviously isn't, you know, one of those players that wants to play with the uncertainty every couple or 3 years. You know, he probably could have said, you know what, now I'm going to take a 2 or a 3 year deal and we'll see where it goes. I mean, they probably could have bridged him yet again at around 5.5, and then he commands more. But instead, you know, he looks at $50 million on the table and says, my family's are going to feel the financial legacy of this contract and the next contract. So I'm happy with that. And I know the Jets are over the moon. They've had enough contract issues and they'll continue to have those issues moving forward. But this guy's not only a hell of a hockey player, as we can see, he is top level character. So they've got a real good leadership piece in the fold for a number of years.
He's really a great guy. He can rub some people the wrong way. He is a wealth of information about the game of hockey. If you ask who was playing on a particular line with so-and-so and so-and-so, Bob Stauffer will be able to tell you it was so-and-so. He's got that mind like a steel trap.
I envy Bob because I can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday. And yeah, it's funny. It's encyclopedic almost. You know what? Bob is a straight shooter. You know, he says what he thinks. You know, he's with the rights holder in 630 Ched, of course. But I tell you what, he tells it pretty straight. If you listen to the various broadcast teams around the league, some of them toe a pretty tight line. Bob, much like Rod Phillips before he left, the old play-by-play man for 37 years, Bob can be critical. Maybe not as critical as the hardcore fan out there who's frustrated given that the Oilers have missed the playoffs 12 of the last 13 years. They want, you know, you got to ask the tougher questions. I tell you what, Bob asks pretty tough questions, and he knows what's going on. He knows what's up. And what I like about Bob is he telegraphs a lot of what's going to happen on the air without coming out and saying it. And that's a way of being cute, because I tell you what, when you're in that position, you hear things and see things that you can't just blurt out. You're not there to break news about the team when you're the color analyst on the radio show. But Bob's pretty much on top of everything that's happening in that rink.
There is a level of, he's you're right. There's quiet. He's got a great way of just getting it out there without really getting it out there. It's very subliminal. And it's one of the reasons why Oilers Now is one of the most popular podcasts in the chorus radio world, coast to coast in Canada. Bob, we had Bob on. Not hard to get Bob on our show, that's for sure, and we always love it when he does come on. But one of the things we talked about was the fact that the Oilers really have been an interesting surprise in the first half of the season thus far, but we had to ask, what might be different about this season compared to the past few?
You're on the inside. When fans say, well, we've been promised, or they've pulled the football away from us more times than I can remember over the last decade or so. Why is it going to be different this year? Why do you think it's going to be different this year in terms of how the messages are delivered and the decisions are made right at the top with Ken Holland?
Well, I can't guarantee that the team's going to suddenly become a 100-point team again. I mean, I think there's going to be some gradual improvement, and the opportunity for real growth might actually occur next summer in terms of upgrading it, just because of some of the cap challenges that have been inherited from the Chiarelli regime. Robin, it's probably been at least a decade since you were sort of the beat guy, and the one thing that's changed is things like what you guys are doing now with the podcast, right? You got podcasts, and you've got more bloggers than ever before. You got a whole entity in the Athletic, and you've got some people that never actually come down to practice. And I know both of you guys valued that aspect of your roles and made sure, Bryn, when you were the sports director and, basically the station manager at 1260, you'd be down there, and Robin, you were there every day. And so there's, part of it's incumbent upon, I guess, the media to ask the right questions. I mean, this misnomer out there that this is like nobody, and the other thing that's changed, guys, is Twitter, frankly. Oh, yeah. So everybody's got an opinion. We have people reading Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl's face from media availabilities in Toronto at the BioSteel camp. So this is what this means. So to be honest with you, you guys both know, Ken a bit. You both have experience dealing with Dave Tippett. What you see is what you get. Peter, in the end, I think Peter got quite exclusive. Like, he really didn't, I know for a fact there were situations where he was strongly advised not to act on certain moves, and he went ahead and did it anyways. And it kind of, like Ken Hitchcock had a lot of pull with Peter upon coming in, because Ken was going to save Peter at that stage of the game. So, long story short, we'll see how she all transpires.
We talked earlier with Theo Fleury about everything he's gone through. Corey Hirsch does the color commentary on the Vancouver Canucks radio broadcast crew, and that's on TSN 1050. Corey's really struggled a lot with mental health issues, and he was great. It was a great interview. And you've known him for a while, too.
Brennan, it's funny how quickly time and life passes by. When I left the Kamloops Daily News to come to the Edmonton Journal in 1989, Corey Hirsch was a scrawny 16-year-old carrot-top kid trying to break in as a goaltender with the Kamloops Blazers. All these years later, his hockey career unfolded. He had a decent run in the National Hockey League, but he struggled with mental health issues, and he's come out about it. And much like Theo, he is now, an advocate for people struggling with these things. He's front and center when it comes to mental health issues, and he's out there doing a lot of good and at the same time living his own life, because these things stay with you, and it's not like he's come through it and left it all behind. He's still got things to deal with, but he's a terrific advocate for people who are experiencing the same thing.
With Theo, we called it an aha moment. With Corey, we kind of called it the light switch moment, and we did do that comparison when Corey Hirsch joined us on the show earlier. Robin and I had a conversation with Theo Fleury probably a couple months ago, and it's a little different, but in some ways it isn't. He talked about how he had a moment where he was at a book signing, and he noticed one guy in the line who just seemed very withdrawn and was holding the book to his chest, and came up to him eventually and put the book in front of him, and he looked at him, and the guy turns to Theo and says, "Me too." And at that point, Theron said he recognized that everything he'd gone through, he'd had to find a way to try to help others. Did you have a click moment where all of a sudden you realized, okay, everything where was that moment?
So I was at I always knew that I would try and help people in some form or way. I didn't really know how. But what really kickstarted it was I was at a Coyotes hockey game in Arizona. And Jared Bouquet is a friend of mine. I played junior with him. He's an agent. And he's sitting at the game with a player that I think is supposed to be playing in the NHL at the time. I'm like, I know everyone. And I asked him, I said, why aren't you playing? And he's like, well, I'm in rehab. And I'm thinking, okay, well, what do you mean? Your knees or whatever, your rehab, whatever. He's like, no, I'm in rehab for alcohol and drug addiction. And I'm like, okay, well, all right, whatever. So I'm like, I know there's obviously with addiction, there's obviously mental health issues. They go hand in hand. So I'm like, let's go for coffee. He's probably lonely. He's here by himself. It's like November, season starting. So I take him for coffee, and I won't say the name of the person.
Okay.
And I just look at him and I just start spilling my story because, I know that there's mental health and addiction go hand in hand. And he looks at me and he says, and he said the same thing. He's like, oh my God, that's the same stuff that I go through, almost with the OCD. And his mom he said his mom had to resuscitate him twice from fentanyl overdoses.
Yeah. Wow.
So it was at that moment I was like, okay, you know what? I'm not the only one out there, and people are. At that point, I didn't really see OCD as suicidal for people, and I just thought, for me, that's what it was, and I didn't really realize that. And it was that moment when I kind of just realized, like, holy crap, like I have to get my story out there. People need to hear my story because I can't let this happen, right? And so I ended up going to bizarre, and then the chain of events just kind of happened. Like I ended up going. Ron Smith, my coach from the minors, he ends up passing away, and I end up going to his funeral in Toronto, and I meet Lana Quinn, who ends up she's the head of the Sedin's Foundation, and or helps with doing that stuff, and she ends up connecting with the Players Tribune, and it's like it was just the snowball effect came, and then when the article came out today, it's still the most. I mean, think of all the great athletes that have been in Players Tribune, like Derek Jeter owns it, and all those guys that have had stories. Today, my story is still the most clicked on they've ever had. And it had like something like 2 million hits in one day, or something ridiculous. So then that just told me, you know what, this is a bigger problem than I even knew it was. So it was quite incredible how well, and I was terrified before it came out. I was like, well, here goes. I'm going to be. This is it for me. I'll never work in the NHL again. And it's been completely the opposite. People have been amazing.
Okay, now we get to our feature interview. This is the one interview where I went, wow, I didn't see that coming. I was a little surprised by that. And it's Ray Ferraro, who joined us on our show. And we started talking a little bit about the transition from being a hockey player to being a broadcaster. A lot of fans, and even some of us in the media, probably assumed it's easy. Just go down and work between the benches, and it's not going to be that tough, which is really kind of very dismissive of some of us. I've never been one of those ones to dismiss that kind of stuff because it's a skill set in broadcasting that's got to be learned, just as it would be if you're a hockey player or a hockey writer. But Ray was great.
Well, the thing with Ray is we know what he was as a hockey player. I saw him as a junior dating back to, the Portland Winterhawks and the Brandon Wheat Kings, where he made more of a mark. The thing is, being a terrific hockey player, 400 plus career goals in the NHL makes you a terrific hockey player. Doesn't mean you're going to be a terrific accountant or lawyer or broadcaster once your playing days are done.
Oh, yeah.
There's no guarantee. We've seen that over and over again. Ray Ferraro is one of the very best in the business. He calls it like he sees it. And a lot of people call it like they see it, but sometimes people don't see it the same way because, frankly, their take is off. Ray has got that ability to not only understand what he's seeing, but to relate it to fans in a way that makes sense to them. He is at the very top of his game in terms of being an analyst on television, and he's in great demand. He's made the transition look easy, even though the transition is far from that.
It's really interesting to me in a time where there's great divisiveness and that we see every day in the country and certainly in the United States. And what I have noticed is that more people are aware of what they should be grateful for or thankful for. And the reason I bring that up is because I'm not even kidding in the least. Now, I never was going to do anything else but be a hockey player. In grade 1, my mom kept the scrapbook for me and my 3 brothers, and it was, your class picture and what you were going to be when you grew up, and your best friend in your school, and so I've written in there in 6-year-old pencilship, NHL player, and so I never wanted to do anything else. I didn't even really know that I was supposed to think about maybe I wasn't going to make it. And, so just to be lucky enough and then to have the ball roll the way it did that I got to play so long, that's one thing. But then to get this, like out of nowhere, I get traded to LA and I get a call from ESPN and they're like, do you want to do some broadcasting? I'm like, well, I've never done it. And the guy that was in charge, Barry Sachs, who really I owe a lot of my career to, who was the head of program or talent at ESPN too, he said, we think we can do this. So while I was playing, I started into broadcasting, and I've been around the NHL now since 1984, December of '84, and man, I just incredibly lucky, guys. Like it's hard work, and I love the work, and I dedicated everything that I did, maybe to the detriment of some other things, to play and to be in the NHL. It was everything to me, and then to get this opportunity and to make what's happened out of it. I started doing the Oilers games, as you guys know, and then TSN brought me on board. It's now unbelievably good, starting on my 11th year at TSN, and man, it's been awesome. I just love it.
Well, Ray, I wouldn't put as much of it down to luck as you seem to. I walked in the dressing room on the other side of the notepad when you were still playing, and I actually remember a conversation I had with you. I don't expect you would, but you were very intense. You were very honest, and I got a great quote out of the deal, but it wasn't easy to do because players aren't happy when they lose, and that makes all the sense in the world. You've gone from one side of the notepad or the camera to the other. Has there been at any point for you an eye-opener about, hey, this is a lot tougher than I thought it might be?
Oh, right. Well, it didn't take very long, Robin. Right when I started, I retired in May of '02, and when Craig Simpson left the Oilers broadcasting crew to get into coaching, I got a call asking if I wanted to audition. Now, I literally just retired 3 months earlier. Mm-hmm. And so I met Kevin Quinn at the airport, and we flew to from Vancouver to Edmonton. I didn't know Kevin. He was just starting as well with the Oilers, and they had a couple other people in there auditioning, and I got the job. So I just thought, like, well, okay, I got the job. I know how to talk. I talk a lot, and I've just finished playing it. I'll just start. And I had no idea that, like there's somebody talking to you in your ear as you're talking on the air. I mean, you can imagine how disconcerting that is.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, for example, the way I describe it to people is that while I'm talking about Monday, my producer is in my ear telling me about Tuesday.
Yeah.
And so I got to keep talking about Monday, but I'm listening to Tuesday. Plus, I'm also listening to what the play-by-play guy says in case he asks me a question. And so what I found is I didn't know how to prepare. I didn't know what to prepare for. And there was quite a learning curve, quite a significant learning curve for me. And, I listen to my first year games sometimes and I'm like, that's like a car crash. But, but I guess it turned out okay.
Well, I tell you, I remember meeting you and Kevin at Cops Coliseum during the lockout year. You were relatively new into the broad. I mean, you knew your way around by then, but still relatively new. I think I was moaning about how bad travel in the AHL was. Of course, the lockout was on. But what struck me back then, Ray, and strikes me now is the edge you bring to the table. That's not something made up. I'm thinking back, like, to Edmonton I think you probably recall the Patrick Stefan play. And I loved it because Labardius had the great call, and then you went off afterwards. From where you sit, is it just about being you? Because to me, what we hear from you isn't shtick, and I can spot that a mile away.
I don't ever think about how I should present this in an entertainment form.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've refined how I get some things out. I try to be I'm always struggling to be a little more brief during the game. I don't want to get burned talking when somebody shoots a puck from a crazy angle and goes in the net. I don't want to be doing that. But I've since I was a little kid, I've always been, I guess, rather outspoken. And what I don't really talk about a lot was one of the reasons I was outspoken was I was really insecure. And so I found the way that I could sort of stake my claim and sort of mask my insecurity was by being louder or more opinionated. And then all of a sudden, I never even realized it. And that was just the way I was. And so it became, when I started to broadcast, as I said about the learning curve, what I did consciously figure out for me is that I know that the game is incredibly hard because I just finished playing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there are things that happen in the game that make no sense to anybody else. But if you're out there playing, you know that the puck spun and hit your stick and you missed an open net. Nobody can see it spin, but I know that happened. I know you can lose your edge because, well, sometimes you just lose your edge. And I also know that sometimes you can make the best intention play and it turns out to be 180 degrees. It's a terrible play. So I keep that in mind. The second thing that I marry that with is that I'm going to be as honest and fair as I can be. Like there are some guys that I've met and, I used to play against that I didn't like, but that can't color how I broadcast about them. Right. It's got nothing to do with it. I don't care who wins or loses. I can't stress this enough to people that listen. And I can talk about myself. If the Oilers win 10 in a row or lose 10 in a row, it does not matter to me one bit. I feel bad for the guys because that would suck to lose 10 in a row, but if they win the Stanley Cup, they're not going to say, hey, Ray's a really good broadcaster. We should give him a Stanley Cup ring. They don't care. I've got to do my job as true to the honesty and fairness that I think the job demands. I don't want to ever be known as somebody that was pulling his punches a bit, that was soft on one team and hard on another. I try to drive it right down the middle of the ice. And the one thing I will say about Patrick and that open net, this is maybe I had too much internal knowledge on that play.
Right.
Okay.
Because I played with Patrick, right? He was an 18-year-old kid when he came in. The greatest critique of Patrick Stefan was that for all his talent, he wasn't really hard when he played. And that play struck me as the most soft plays. Like, you're in the NHL, you're 20 feet out, shoot it in the net. What the hell do you have to go in there and just touch it into the net? And it bounced over a stick, and then the circus that went on beyond that. Like, honestly, guys, if you think, and Peter's call is awesome.
Oh, spectacular.
Because once Patrick fell in the corner, if the puck would have gone anywhere else, the play would have been over. But it came right to him, so he tried to save the play. And then he passed it right to Hemsky.
Yeah.
You know, you're like, how did that even happen? And then, whoa, wait a minute, now the puck's up there. Whoa, wait, it's in here. Like, you couldn't script that play to be better for Edmonton and worse for Dallas and Stefan. But so for me, I knew him, and I'm like, geez, Patrick, shoot it in a damn net. I was so mad.
You sounded indignant.
I'm like, what the hell? Shoot it in the net. It's wide open. And then when you think about it, if he shot it in the net, it would have been really boring. This was way better.
Yeah. The other thing, too, and we were listening to it just before we got to you today, because we talked to Peter a couple of weeks ago about it, and it's a real highlight for him. He says he still gets goosebumps. But you're right when you talk about it being a circus, and we only see one ring of the circus on television, but Peter had a great call. There was a wonderful stoppage where nobody said anything, and the crowd noise was there, and then you jumped in. It couldn't be a more perfect scenario. But man, everybody was just so real and raw. It was really a magical moment, and it was just crazy.
There are crazy plays that happen, you know, like when you're broadcasting, but you know, and you're trying to describe everything that's going on. I also did that the one game where there was the brawl, and I think Mike Bishai was in the bench fighting somebody on the ice.
Yep.
Right? Like, how are you trying to that was a game, it was Atlanta, I think. And I'm like, how are you trying to describe that and keep your thoughts going all at once? Like, there's certain things that just happen, and you're like, you're out on the thinnest of wires, and you're doing the best you can with it, and sometimes it just works. That day really worked. And, you know, I've had some games I think that I would consider real highlights of my broadcasting career. One of them was a Canada-Russia World Junior Gold Medal game, and it was amazing. Canada won 6-5, and it was one of the best games that I've ever seen or done. I also did, along with Gord Miller, Gord and I did that junior game, of course, but we also did last spring's playoff. We did the San Jose Vegas game, and I mean, that was absolute pandemonium for 20 minutes. Right? It was like, it wasn't one call. It was a series of things that kept happening. And, you know, you get back to your room and you listen to it after, and some days you go, I didn't quite get it. And that one, we were like, oh, we got that one. Cale Makar's first goal last year in the playoffs, we got that one.
Yeah.
You know, like, sometimes you don't get it, but that one we just got. Like, I don't even know that sometimes I'll say something, and Cammie, my wife, will say after, she'll say, why did you say that? And I'm like, you know, I don't know. And so we were going through the highlight with Makar, and they showed his parents, and, you know, the building was going off. It was so loud. And then they showed his parents, and I don't know why, but I thought of him as a little kid, because his parents had just flown in for the game, you know, kind of like going to a Bantam game.
Right.
And I said, I don't know what that kid dreams about, but it couldn't be any better than that. And I just thought of a little boy dreaming of the NHL. And then he scored in his first shift, or his first period of his first game. That's a playoff game. And mom and dad are there.
So there you go, Ray Ferraro wrapping things up with our feature interview today. Robin, we couldn't get to everybody, but we have to send a huge thanks to everybody who's been part of our podcast through the last 6 months. Ricky Ray, our friend and writer Ben Kuzma out in Vancouver, Peter Labardius, Kenny Reed, Corey Clenning, who climbed Mount Kilimanjaro for a great cause.
Yep. Thanks, Corey. He helped raise money for the mustard seed, of which I'm a part in Edmonton. We do our best to alleviate poverty for those living on the streets in Edmonton, and what Corey did, not only a bucket list item, but something that helped a lot of people.
And also kind of walked us through the whole process, and it was not easy just to get there. Anyway, Corey, thanks for coming on. Mitch Blair out in Regina along with Rod Peterson, also a fantastic guest, AJ Jakubic in Ottawa. As things were kind of wrapping up in the nation's capital, we had to talk to AJ. Jack Cookson over at Pro-Am Sports, can't thank him enough for his support through the entire series that we've done so far. Dwayne Vigneault, who's the head guy with the Grey Cup committees now for the Canadian Football League. Jerry Forbes, radio voice in Calgary, now retired, but still casts a huge shadow on the community in Calgary. Also, Terry Jones. We had Jonesy on a few weeks ago, and Jonesy had some great stories.
What a surprise. You know what? And Jonesy sort of kicked off a murderer's row for us of media guys. I've been on the road enough with Jonesy, as people out there in Edmonton at least will know. Wrote against him for years while I was at the Journal, went across the street to the Sun, wrote with him for years. Jonesy's got a million stories. He put out that curling book, which is absolutely terrific. I could spend 3 hours with Jonesy. He came in the studio, which was wonderful to have him sitting here, regaling us with tales from the road.
And not all of it made the air, by the way.
Oh, no. And just to, you know what? Jonesy's getting up in age now. There's far more stories under the bridge than are still to come, but it's always terrific to sit down with Large.
I hope he gets around and writes a lot of those stories down too, because it would be that'd be a fun book. Also,
not all of them. Not all of them.
No, you're right. And also a big thank you to both broadcasters Tim Spelsey and Grant Pollock, who just last week had an opportunity to kind of give us the lowdown on what it was like back in the Battle of Alberta days back in the 1980s. Anyway, it's been a great start and much more to come in the year 2020. Do you want to say anything as we move through this holiday period? Anything in particular?
Well, I would thank the people out there who are taking the time to click on the links and listen to what we have to say. I hope you keep coming back. We're going to endeavor to have guests on and subject matter that has you wanting to come back. And, you know, we're just getting started with this, and I'm hopeful that our audience will grow and that we will continue to provide you with a reason to come back to us. So aside from that, happy holidays to everybody, and we'll be talking to you again soon.
Absolutely. And also, if you're interested in sponsoring us, we would love to hear from you. All you have to do is drop us an email at mightymouth@shaw.ca. Also, make sure you continue to tell your friends and you subscribe and hit the RSS to our feed on your favorite ear candy sites. Coming up next, and this is a great way to kick off the new year, it's Behind the Dressing Room Door. It's an episode with Barry Stafford and Ken Lowe with the Edmonton Oilers, and that's coming up here in early January, so it's going to be a lot of fun. Both guys have seen it all, not only with the Edmonton Oilers, but with the Edmonton Eskimos, because Ken Lowe was the trainer with the Eskimos through some of those Eskimo heydays, the glory days in the 80s. So, and then Staffy's just been around forever with the Edmonton Oilers and has seen it all from not only Stanley Cups. He's been in Spengler Cups. He's played with the University of Alberta Golden Bears under Claire Drake.
Yes.
There's, of course, the Winter Olympics, the gold medals, all that kind of stuff. It's going to be a great episode, and that's going to kick us off here coming up in the first couple of weeks in January. All right, Robin, that's it. I just can't believe, where has the time gone? Yeah. So on behalf of all of us, happy holidays to everybody, and a happy new year, 2020, coming your way. Thanks.